This is Jason Horsley reading from the Kubrickon, The Cult of Kubrick, Attention Capture and the Inception of AI.
Quote, "Media create their most powerful effects when they efface evidence of their activity." Brian Rotman, Becoming Beside Ourselves. Quote, "AI, robots and humans work better when they work together. Human chess players in collaboration with AI chess programs consistently beat both other humans and other computers working on their own." Klaus Schwab, Shaping the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Quote, "I've compared Griffith's career to the Icarus myth, but at the same time I've never been certain whether the moral of the Icarus story should only be, as is generally accepted, don't try to fly too high, or whether it might also be thought of as forget the waxen feathers and do a better job on the wings."
Introduction. Confessions of a Sick Mind, Stanley Kubrick's Atrocity Exhibition. His hands were tied, the Kubrick vacuum. Ludicrous from the word go. Pauline Kael on Eyes Wide Shut. This may be the first book written about Stanley Kubrick by someone who doesn't like Stanley Kubrick. Furthermore, I feel a degree of contempt for people who revere his films. Somehow I must find a way to make this antipathy work for the subject and not against it. Even, if I can, make it central to it. If there is a way to do this, I think it has to do with subjectivity. Consider this a test, which is to say an experiment. This is not a book about movies or about a famous movie maker, but about how our perceptions around these things have been managed, how, why, and to what end. What follows in this introduction, then, is a test of the reader's Kubrickophilia. If you feel passionately about Kubrick movies, ask yourself this: who or what was the primary force that formed that passion? Taste, preference, opinion, these things are not innate to us. They are forged within us, shaped by external hands. Culture is a kind of fungus that grows inside the petri dish of the mind, but mind is like a petri dish made of the fungus that grows in it. While this work purports to be about a big subject, the harvesting of human consciousness and life force, and the creation of a form of artificial intelligence indistinguishable from demonic possession, it is, like all grandiose endeavours, rooted in the mundane and the personal, even the trivial. For example, my utter incomprehension that Kubrick's last movie, Eyes Wide Shut, is now almost de rigueur described as Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece. That I find this fact supremely alienating might seem strange in 2022, as most of the world seems to have lost its ability to distinguish between a scientific tyranny conducting corporate medical experimentation and a sincere attempt to stop a pandemic using the scientific method. Sometimes it is the smallest splinters that are the hardest to remove. It's my view that Eyes Wide Shut is the product of a sick mind in more ways than one. A sick mind, as in a mind twisted by overexposure to a world of absolute power and corruption, and a mind sick with worry that knew it was powerless to do anything about it. According to Kubrick biographer John Baxter, Kubrick had an absolute phobia about any stranger who approaches him. He worries constantly about being kidnapped and about his family's safety. To my own mind, the only good thing about Eyes Wide Shut is the subtext. That's it. As a work of art, a cultural piece of entertainment, the only thing it has going for it is what it might be trying to communicate. The means of communication are so ludicrous, however, that they approach the grotesque. If A Clockwork Orange indicates a pathological psyche at work, Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut shows that psyche's total and final possession by pathology. Are you feeling rankled yet? Eyes Wide Shut is a travesty. If there was such a thing as aesthetic crime, it would be guilty on almost every count. It is an erotic thriller completely devoid of erotic charge, thrills or menace. Every scene is atrocious. The only question is it deliberately awful, and if so, how and why did Kubrick achieve these effects? is the total implausibility of every last scene, it seeming to exist in a netherworld where no recognizable form of human behavior exists, designed to simulate a dream reality. If so, it fails utterly, because although it does create a feeling of excruciating discomfort, the discomfort is for Kubrick and the film itself, not for any characters in the movie. But perhaps this too is deliberate. One thing I will be exploring in this work is the idea that Kubrick wanted to make the worst film he could make as a kind of message. This then raises the question, a message to who, and what was it saying? Quote, "It really is a creepily bad movie." Pauline Kael on Eyes Wide Shut. I've seen Eyes Wide Shut 4 times now, more times than any other film I mostly detest. The reason is simple: fascination. The film holds a fascination for me, one that it did even before it began to be taken seriously by otherwise sane people. When it was first released, few people tried to defend it. The fascination it holds is born from the lurking sense that the awfulness of the film is not the usual kind of awfulness, but a mysteriously intentional awfulness with some awful mysterious purpose behind it. For many, the film holds a similar fascination, even if they don't admit to the film's awfulness, one that has to do with a feeling that Kubrick was trying to communicate something with his last movie, that his hands were somehow tied, that the film was taken away from him, and that he was killed because of it, and so on. These last two beliefs are mutually dependent. The idea that Kubrick was killed because of Eyes Wide Shut, I keep typing Eyes Wide Shit and having to go back and correct it reluctantly, at least the versions released in 1999, is clearly ridiculous. Despite the internet buzz around it and a number of straw-clutching pseudo-academic essays, the film reveals nothing much about anything. As an exposé of the depraved inner workings of the elite, it's on a par with what? I would have to dredge my memory for the lowest grade B movie to come up with a comparison. Why serious-minded researchers take the movie seriously at that level can only be explained by one fact: it was made by Kubrick, and Kubrick must have known something, because he was Kubrick. Hence, the idea that he was killed to prevent the real uncensored version of the film from ever being seen had to be invented. I find this idea almost, but not quite, as implausible as I find Eyes Wide Shut implausible. I agree that Kubrick was trying to communicate something with Eyes Wide Shut, because there's no other reason to make a movie besides trying to communicate something. I would also agree that his hands were tied in some way, and that he had to make it within some very restricting limits of decorum, perhaps because his daughter was hostage to the Church of Scientology, which fact seems strangely entangled with Kubrick's otherwise confounding choice of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman for the leads in the film. Cruise was at the time Scientology's once and future celebrity king, but by the time filming began on Eyes Wide Shut on November 1996, the two had been estranged from the church for several years. Scientology chief David Miscavige had already been recruiting all of Cruise's household employees, including Michael Dovan, who spied on him for 10 years on behalf of the church, to keep Miscavige up to speed on the cruiser. Eyes Wide Shut infuriated Miscavige because, quote, he was no longer receiving these daily reports on Cruise. The 15-month-long shoot in the UK, including 46 straight weeks of filming, a Guinness World Record, caused an extended blackout period for Miscavige. Is it any wonder if Scientology was keen to get its hooks into Kubrick's daughter Vivian, hostage for hostage? Or perhaps all of this was part of a larger and much older plot to control Kubrick and his movies, a plot in which abducting his daughter was only the latest move on the socio-cultural political chessboard, with Kubrick as both king of his own petty domain and pawn within a much larger and more complex game. Whatever the behind-the-scenes story, none of it actually changes what is there on the screen, though it can change our experience of it. Eyes Wide Shut isn't a bad film in the way Full Metal Jacket is a bad film, sort of forced and overwrought but lacking a movie at its centre, nor is it morally repugnant the way A Clockwork Orange is morally repugnant. It's significantly worse a film than either of these films, but it's also different. In Full Metal Jacket, it was easy to see where Kubrick was aiming for greatness and missed,
with Eyes Wide Shut, it's hard to see what Kubrick was aiming for. It appears to be a kind of nightmare comedy a la After Hours or David Lynch, and for the first hour of the film he almost pulls it off. But just at the point when it needs to go deep and dark, when Hartford enters the labyrinth and becomes a live witness to the workings of the human unconscious in all its seamy, sordid glory, the film does a belly flop, and all the wind goes out of its sails. It never recovers after that. There is absolutely no tension in these later scenes. There's also no real evidence that Kubrick meant there to be. By this point, there's no way to mistake the film for a nightmarish comedy either. Watching Eyes Wide Shut the last time, for what I sincerely prayed would be the last time in my life, I got the sense that Kubrick had written the script with Frederick Raphael and then done a William Burroughs/Brian Geissin on it, shuffled all the scenes, even the lines, into a random sequence, and then gone blindly along with whatever came up, hoping for the best. The movie is like a bad dream in the worst possible sense. It is incoherent, rambling, banal, utterly implausible, and faintly embarrassing once it is over. In a word, ludicrous, from the word go. It is like something we don't want to talk about with anyone and would rather just forget all about. Despite this, or because of it, people do want to talk about it and what it means. Besides Slavoj Žižek, who explored the theme of female sexuality being an annihilating threat to the male psyche, which accounted for the total lack of eros in the orgy scenes, no one, as far as I know, has got close to its meaning. The reason is that, as with A Clockwork Orange, Eyes Wide Shut has all the symptoms of the disease it is diagnosing. Studying it is like asking to be projectile vomited on by an Ebola case to analyse the data. All you want to do after is jump in the shower and get yourself checked out as soon as possible. What if, with Eyes Wide Shut, Kubrick set out to make a movie that would be unsatisfying dramatically and aesthetically, but at the same time so intriguing that we would recreate it in our own psyches as a way to try and make it work? The film has great potential, we come away saying to ourselves, and it has some kind of weird vision. At the same time, it's overacted, badly staged, and the dialogue is poorly written. Everything about it is somehow off. What's more, there's nothing cathartic in Eyes Wide Shut. None of the scenes give us any kind of release. We can't have a natural response to them because, aesthetically and dramatically, they're not allowing us to suspend our disbelief. As a result, some viewers may find they're experiencing the film on two levels. On one, something's going on here that's meaningful. On another, they feel repulsed by it. Like Kubrick, they want to do another take and another over and over in their minds to somehow make it right. So they go away and unconsciously reshoot the movie in their heads. In the film, Tom Cruise has a wild and crazy night and then spends the rest of the movie retracing his steps and trying to figure out what happened. In the same way, we may end up replaying the movie, looking for the clues that could solve the mystery and set us free from the dream narrative. Before we know it, the film has taken up permanent residence in our unconscious minds. This is similar to why emojis are necessary when we are texting and emailing people. If all we have are the words, there's an absence of emotional meaning. Over millennia, we've become used to body language, and suddenly, in the past few decades, it's not there anymore. Facial expressions and tone of voice are not there. We can't help but unconsciously fill in those spaces based on the text, and since the text is inherently cold, we tend to imagine the worst. The solution is to fill it in with something friendly, something warm, something human, a smiley. In a similar way, a Kubrick film is emotionally cold, removed, and weirdly lifeless. It's an automatic reaction to try to animate it and make it human, to put our own blood into it. The movie lures us in with the promise of a movie experience, but to have one we end up actually animating it, viewing it in such a way that we give it part of our essence. In this way, the medium, machine, is sucking the blood out of us to animate itself. Kubrick's films, like all movies, only more so, are empty vessels to be filled by the subjective lives of the audience. This is analogous, as we shall see, to AI's need to develop a subjective core of sentience. Secret pedophile elites. Quote, Kubrick has indeed always had a pronounced interest in altered states of consciousness and multiple personalities. Lawrence Bashar, The Secret of the Pyramid. One clear example of the vacuum at the core of Eyes Wide Shut is that of the mansion orgy scene. The message of Eyes Wide Shut regarding the sinister rituals of the cryptocratic elite is, in the words of Ziegler, nothing happened. Though we are meant to doubt the truth of this along with Hartford, it is still the message of the film, because it is what we have seen for ourselves. We have been inside the secret mansion, and what we have seen, though shot in the sumptuous Kubrick style, is a great big nothing burger, a bunch of naked women and tuxedoed men having sex in kinky masks. Cale called it the most hygienic thing I've ever seen. In the post-Jimmy Savile, post-Jeffrey Epstein world, this shouldn't even pass for conspiracy light. It's a whitewash that's also hogwash. Instead, the film is now touted all over the internet as exposing the dark underbelly of elite society, not because of what's in it, but because of the awareness that audiences bring to it and retroactively project onto it. Not that it is necessarily all projection. Kubrick was an insider, so it stands to reason that his orgy scene was really a placekeeper for something far darker. Jay Widener has suggested that, as originally intended, Hartford's wife, Nicole Kidman, would have been at the Mars ball as one of the sex slaves. Laurent Bachard has pointed out that the two old men in the toy store at the end of the film are seen at Ziegler's party at the start, and that they are there in the store to kidnap the Hartford daughter and turn her into a sex slave for the elites, like her mother. These possibilities suggest a very different movie, one that would be worth discussing seriously as a chilling portrait of institutional ritual abuse, mind control, pedophilia, etc. But this is not the movie we got, and any discussion of the film that doesn't begin with an acknowledgement of the aesthetic reality ignores the most important fact of all. It's like trying to discuss the horizon with the hoodwinked, or what's outside Plato's cave with the shadow gazers. Laurent Bachard's The Secret of the Pyramid appeared in the January 2013 issue of the film journal Positif. His analysis was reproduced, with some oversimplified and over-literal imagery, in a YouTube video by Gasface, and given the hard sell and easy-to-dismiss title of Kubrick and the Illuminati. This made it easier for one writer, in a derisive piece, to use it as an example of the paranoid style, a term he got from Richard Hofstadter. Bachard's interpretation is quite speculative and overly dependent on some questionable source material, Cathy O'Brien's Transformation of America, and the conspiracy law of mind control monarchs, an unsubstantiated area of the much more firmly established MK Ultra program history. But it contains a number of observational gems. The prestigious New York-based arts magazine Blue Art Info gave a concise summation. Quote, after analysing the omnipresence of triangle patterns in the film's sets, Bachard concluded that Eyes Wide Shut is about mind control exerted by the secret society to which Alice Hartford, Nicole Kidman, belongs. Her husband, Bill Hartford, Tom Cruise, with big closed eyes, is blind to the fact that his wife is part of a cult that provides sex slaves to wealthy elites. Bachard claims that the theme of abused children is at the heart of all Kubrick's movies since Lolita, and that the Hartford's child would also become, under the control of her mother, a slave of the secret society. End quote. Central to Bachard's thesis is the following claim from The Secret of the Pyramid, translation Deborah Gray and Jason Horsley. Quote, Alice's strange dreams and altered states resemble a perfect monarch victim. It is just as if Kubrick took Schnitzler's novel Trauma Novelle and changed it gradually to Trauma Novelle, sneaking in the theme of mind control, so dear to him. In this way, everything that happens within Schnitzler's dream in the movie becomes the fragmented memories of an alter ego. This idea is especially clear in a scene where Bill returns home to find his wife waking from a dream, similar in many ways to his own evening in Somerton.
In Kubrick's version, it is not so much a case of coincidence or synchronicity between Bill's experience and Alice's dream, as of a young woman who served as a brainwashed sex slave during the ritual that Bill surprised at the castle. Alice's mind then repressed the traumatic memory so she could continue to function freely, in a reflex psychiatrists describe as a fugue state. Thus, each of the traumas suffered corresponds to a fugue state or different personality stored in her body and brain. End quote. Certainly this reading transforms Eyes Wide Shut into a much more disturbing and intriguing movie than what most people saw, not least because it provides a context for the grotesquely affected and unnatural quality of many of the scenes, besides that of Kubrick simply being out of touch with human speech patterns, dialogue or dramatic pacing. In other words, were some of the scenes in Eyes Wide Shut deliberately ludicrous, or are Kubrick defenders clutching for straws and finding them in the circular eddies of pop conspiracy lore? To support his thesis, Varshad makes a series of observations ranging from the tenuous to the compelling, including the following. Everyone in Eyes Wide Shut, especially Nicole Kidman, seems to be moving and speaking in a kind of daze or hypnotic trance state. I would add, to an almost maddening degree. Throughout Eyes Wide Shut, Kubrick also ceaselessly forged links between Alice and the girls of the orgy. Possibly. At Ziegler's party, Alice flees Nightingale, Todd Field, because she unconsciously recognizes the man playing the piano in Somerton. Maybe Alice does leave the dance floor pretty rapidly after her husband joins Nightingale, or points Nightingale out to her as an old college friend, and she ignores Bill's suggestion of saying hello to him. All the women Bill meets in his night prowl represent aspects of Alice or alters. Unverifiable, but a compelling reading consistent with film analysis. The daughter of the costume shop owner being pimped out by her father is meant as a nod to the truth about Alice, that she is a monarch sex slave. Plausible. The repeat reference to rainbows is a reference to the Wizard of Oz, and thence to theosophy. The author of Wizard was a theosophist, and to cult mind control. Plausible. The theme of childhood abuse has always been at the heart of Kubrick's work. Debatable. Kubrick's AI is the idea of a synthetic child and his association with an android prostitute, Gigolo Joe, clearly suggesting that what use Kubrick reserves for super toys, the child robots of the future. Intriguing. In Eyes Wide Shut, abused childhood is everywhere. Varshad's hammer has started seeing nails in every frame. Bill and Alice's daughter Helena, a nod to Theosophy founder H.P. Blavatsky, is first seen wearing butterfly wings. True. Monarch owes its name to a variety of butterfly. So goes the lore. At the end of the film, Helena wanders into a toy store where a game with a red logo, Magic Circle, is clearly visible. True. This is followed by a shot of lots of teddy bears, which in the United States are a well-known symbol of child abuse. It is certainly not a well-known one. An internet search brings up a 4chan meme called Pedo Bear, but that began in 2010. When Helena finds the toy of her dreams in the store, it is a Barbie doll adorned with butterfly wings, which she proudly brandishes in front of her parents. True. In The Shining, when Danny first sees the ghosts of the twin sisters at the Overlook, there is an advertising poster for a ski resort behind them bearing the name Monarch. True. There's also an odd light shining next to the skier's face, giving the image an extra je ne sais quoi. Oh, and the red fire bell echoes Hal's one red eye. The event that kick-starts the film's action is Alice's relaying of her encounter with the naval officer in the elevator of a hotel, in which one glance from him so transfixed her that she was ready to leave everything for one night with him. This suggests the effect of a post-hypnotic trigger, including a trance state or the activation of a pre-programmed alter a la MKUltra. Of all the plot details Varshad samples, this is among the most compelling in terms of his thesis. The father of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, was a naval officer. True. Ziegler's secretary in the film is also performed by Michael Doven, a notorious Scientologist who was the watcher of Cruise and features in the credits of all his films. Not all, but certainly many. He started out as Cruise's personal assistant on Far and Away. Vivian Kubrick joined the Church of Scientology shortly before Eyes Wide Shut began filming. She did join the church, but when exactly is unknown. Farshad doesn't make it clear, but presumably he is implying that Kubrick's making Eyes Wide Shut led the church to abduct his daughter, since he would already have been in pre-production by the time she joined. One possible implication is that Kubrick's casting of Cruise was part of a yet-to-be-declared war on Scientology that became official a few years later via Anonymous, the online ARGs and IRL protests. Anonymous was a forerunner to QAnon. Farshad calls Eyes Wide Shut a father's requiem for his lost daughter. The Blue in Art Info article claims that, quote, uncovering barely veiled allusions to Scientology in Eyes Wide Shut, among them the fact that Tom Cruise is himself a zealous Scientologist, the article claimed to discover a parallel between the movie and Kubrick's personal life. His daughter Vivian Kubrick joined the Scientologists during the preparation for Eyes Wide Shut and was no longer speaking to her family as of 1998. In the last scene of Eyes Wide Shut, when the Hartfords discuss their marriage in a toy store, their daughter seems to be kidnapped in a disturbing scene in the background. Indeed, one of the film's last images shows the child at the end of a store aisle surrounded by three men. Farshad points out that they were already present early in the movie at the party thrown by Victor Ziegler, Sidney Pollack, an influential member of the secret society that Tom Cruise discovers. The cult thus seems to be shadowing the Hartford family, and it's possible that the daughter will be kidnapped by them, another echo of Vivian Kubrick's fate since she disappeared after becoming a Scientologist. End quote. These are not threads that I plan to pursue directly in what follows, but they do serve to indicate two things. Firstly, that Eyes Wide Shut, independently of its merits as a movie, contains a hidden body of meanings, even an alternate raison d'etre, or reason for being made. Secondly, this alternate reading of the film need not have anything to do with the one that has, in the 2 decades since its release, subsequently been attributed to it. This is central to the thesis of the Kubrickon, that not only are Kubrick's movies not what they seem, but they are also not what a growing consensus of Kubrick revisionists claim they are. This, I will argue, is only a deeper, darker level of seeming, a second matrix. For the rest of this introduction and the full MP3s for the Kubrickon, you can order the audiobook at the link in the show notes or find it at landmademan.com. Also available are the audiobooks I have made of Prisoner of Infinity, Vice of Kings, and an old Aeolus Cephas book which is withdrawn from circulation, Homo sapiens, and of course 16 Maps of Hell. If you wish to participate in group meetings or have a one-to-one, email me at jason@protonmail.com.